a group of guys who were former Shin Bet and former Mossad, but it really does give you a balanced view between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's shocking that they were able to even make something like this. Yeah. Like you're gonna have sympathy for both the Israelis and the Palestinians in this. Like you're gonna want both sides to win, which doesn't make any kind of logical sense. But anyway, in the most recent season, there's this ongoing thing that they do where they only communicate with each other through a backgammon app, right? Because the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, the French, the British, everybody's intercepting everything, right? Phones and emails and text messages and intercepting everything. Nobody's looking at backgammon apps. And you know, all of these game apps that we have, they all have little chat functions when you're playing live. Right. I have a backgammon app on my phone. I play against Lebanese and Turks and Syrians all the time. I do. It's fun. And you can chat. So that's how Mossad and Shin Bet communicate with their agents, because they know it's not going to be intercepted. And even if it is intercepted, no human being's ever going to see it. It's just game chat, right? But it's not game chat. It's very serious operational planning. That's what the San Bernardino shooter was doing. He was communicating over like a Wii or whatever it was, a Twitch or Switch or whatever. I don't even know anymore. My kids are beyond that now. Mm-hmm. But that's the danger. The danger is in gaming systems.
Like when it comes to the government looking into like private communications of people, is it just like how much attention are they really paying?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it just a big catch-all?
Zero attention normally. Yeah, it's a big catch-all. You know, NSA built this facility in the desert in Utah, right? And they started building it right after the 9/11 attacks, and there's enough computer memory there to save every phone call, every text message, and every email from every American for the next 500 years, right? That's how much space they have, how much memory they have. No human being is going to listen to 99.9999% of any of that stuff. It's just being vacuumed up by these, you know, Cray computers or whatever those supercomputers are called these days. And it's being held in case someday law enforcement needs to go back to it for leads or for information about a crime that has been committed to build a case. Okay. Which is great. Well, it's not great, but you know, if it's not going to be used against somebody for unethical purposes, I can understand it, provided that they get a warrant. It's not just, well, you know, we're gonna collect on everybody now. No, NSA's, first of all, federal law says NSA can't do this. Secondly, NSA's own charter says that it can't do this. And they're like, well, 9/11 changed everything. Well, you know what? Okay, then change the law. Don't just pretend that the law doesn't exist, which is what I've been saying about torture for 20 years. Right. Yeah. You want to torture people? Okay. You and I can agree to disagree on this, but you got to change the law. You can't just pretend that the law says something that it doesn't.
Right. Now, this sort of gets back to the story, the recent story or article that you wrote about, what was the article about Newsweek and the Pentagon Cyber Command? Or not,
NewsGuard.
NewsGuard, yeah. Yeah, NewsGuard and Consortium News. And what was the story there?
Yeah, so there's this organization called NewsGuard that was founded a few years ago by two media professionals. One was the founder of Court TV, and the other is the former publisher of the Wall Street Journal. And they decided to hire a bunch of young, recent college graduates with degrees in journalism and have them analyze literally every independent news organization that's out there on the internet, everything, and assign a score to every one of these news organizations. Now, the score is from 0 to 100. 100 being absolutely reliable, Associated Press. 100, right? To 0, which is like Alex Jones has a 0.
Right.
Okay. So,
You think he's an agent?
he's too stupid to be an agent. He
Really?
can't keep his mouth shut. Yeah.
I know a lot of people who think he's an agent.
No,
or a useful
he's-
idiot.
Oh, he may be a useful idiot. But in terms of being like a witting agent, no, he's too stupid.
Right. Okay. Sorry
And
to interrupt.
No, that's okay. And so, what they've done is they immediately politicized the process. When I say politicized, what I mean is they took a position on Ukraine, they took a position on Syria, and if you aren't in line with that position, they knock you down to below 60%. Well, if you're below 60%, you get a warning. Not you. You don't get the warning. Their subscribers get a warning saying, whoa, warning, this website's not reliable. It's fake news.
How do they get to their subscribers?
Yeah, so most of their subscribers are governmental entities, and most of them are in the Pentagon. So what they do is they provide an extension on the website. And so if I go to alexjones.com or whatever that website is,
Yeah.
their extension will give me, until a couple of months ago, it was either red or green. It'll give me a red, and it'll say, warning. There's a little warning that comes up, warning, this is a fake news site. Now, they'll give you a numerical figure, and it'll say, 10%, warning, this is a fake news site.
Okay.
But how do they determine what's fake news? Well, what they did with Consortium News, and this started a year ago, is they sent an email to the editor-in-chief of Consortium News, and they said, hi, we're looking at Consortium News, and you have such interesting articles on Consortium News, but we have a couple of questions that our clients would like to know the answers to. First of all, who are the members of your board of directors? And do you have the board of directors listed on the website? Okay, yeah, here are the board of directors. It's right there on the masthead. Right, it's easy to see, and that's kind of an innocuous question. Second, what's your policy for issuing corrections? Okay, our policy is we say, hey, we realized something we said was incorrect. Here's the correction. Why did you say on October the 10th, 2021, that there were neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian military? Well, because they wear patches with swastikas on them, and they pledge fealty to a guy who heads the Ukrainian Nazi party. Like, nobody's saying the Ukrainian government is a Nazi government. Mm-hmm. Nobody's saying that, Zelensky's a closet Nazi. But there are, well-identified neo-Nazis who are members of the Ukrainian military. It's fact.
Right.
They don't like that. That's fake news. Well, somebody should tell CNN because they did an entire documentary about it. So that's fake news. Another thing is, why did you publish an article in 2016 that said that the evidence was not clear that Bashar al-Assad used gas on his own people? Well, because 8 whistleblowers from the United Nations came out and said, we don't believe Assad did this, we believe Al-Qaeda did it. See, but Al-Qaeda is now allied with the Pentagon. Because this is bizarro world that we live in now. The Nusra Front used to be called Al-Qaeda. Now we arm them to help them overthrow the Syrian government. See, but they don't like talking about that.
When did this happen?
A couple of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are like 20,000 articles in the, maybe it's not 20, maybe it's 10,000 articles in the Consortium News archives. They objected to 4 because they didn't like the analytic line. Well, as it turns out, these 4 were written by Christopher Hedges. Now, Chris is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, lifelong journalist for the New York Times, and he was the New York Times Middle East bureau chief. So that's the guy that you're going to accuse of spreading fake news? A 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. So they went after Consortium. Then they started going after others. The Gray Zone is another one. The Gray Zone is published by Max Blumenthal, the son of Sidney Blumenthal, also of the New York Times,
Right.
confidant of the Clintons. And Max is a cutting-edge journalist. I don't agree with all of his positions on things, but by God, he does his research. So he said he's not even going to fight it. He wears this red mark from NewsGuard as a badge of honor, he said on the Jimmy Dore Show. Then they went after antiwar.com, which is a libertarian, kind of a conservative. It's like a Republican anti-war site.
Okay.
But highly respected in the independent journalism community. Went after them. Then they went after the Scheer Post. I write for the Scheer Post. Bob Scheer is a friend of mine. Bob Scheer spent almost 30 years at the Los Angeles Times as an investigative reporter. He's been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 11 times. You're way too young to remember. You weren't born yet, but he's the one who got presidential candidate Jimmy Carter to admit that he lusted in his heart. Right? He was an evangelical Christian. You can't think about other women. You're a married man. Oh my God, he lusted in his heart. Right? It was a big scandal in 1980. Seriously. This is how far we've come. Wow. And they decided, oh, no, they don't like his position on Ukraine. This is unacceptable. He's calling for peace in Ukraine. We have to stand up to the Russian bear. And Putin, Putin's crazy, right? Isn't that what we always say about foreign leaders we don't like? They're crazy.
Right.
So now they're going after the Scheer Post. And so somebody's got to stop these guys. About a month ago, Consortium News hired a constitutional attorney who filed a suit against NewsGuard and against the Pentagon. Now, why the Pentagon? Because, as it turns out, the only client that NewsGuard has that matters is the Defense Department's Cyber Command. Well, it's not up to the Cyber Command.
Is that part of NSA?
Yes, NSA is a part of the Pentagon too.
Okay.
So they're all, it's all a joint
Right. Got it. Okay.
leadership. And so they're suing, saying that, first of all, this is government interference in the press. It's a clear, direct violation of the Constitution's First Amendment. Secondly, it's not up to NewsGuard, just like it's not up to DOD to decide what's true and what's not true, or what analytic line the American people should see or should not see. If I don't want to read Alex Jones, I just don't read Alex Jones. It's as simple as that.
Right.
But now you've got people, ruining businesses and ruining people's lives just because they don't like your position on Ukraine.
Who are some of the people that are running that company, NewsGuard?
Their board of directors would make your hair stand up. The board is made up of people like Michael Hayden, the former director of both the CIA and the FBI and the NSA.
During 9/11, right?
During 9/11, he was the head of NSA, and then he oversaw the torture program at the CIA. Tom Ridge, the former, the first Secretary of Homeland Security, the guy who defended before the Supreme Court international rendition, kidnapping. Anders, what's his name, from Denmark, the former head of NATO, is another one.
About a year ago, I started working with this company called Merrick Health, and I wanted to get a comprehensive breakdown of what was going on inside my body, from my vitamin levels to my lipid levels to my hormone levels, etc. Using the most elaborate and cutting-edge testing on the market, they were able to advise me on a new diet, sleep, training, and supplement protocol designed to maximize performance and support longevity. I tell all my friends about Merrick Health because you simply cannot get this level of knowledge or attention to detail from a general practitioner who sees up to 50 patients per day. Plus, insurance companies regularly deny progressive treatment options. Primary care physicians refuse to order comprehensive lab work, and standards of care lag.
The illegal
People. Now back to the show.
So the whole list is people from
So you're saying that
the intelligence community.
these people, these intelligence community veterans, are in charge of policing the news publications in our
Yeah.
country.
Can you imagine?
It's kind of hard to swallow.
This is so obviously illegal.
Yeah. So what
But
happened
it's-
with the court case?
It was just filed a month ago. I spoke with the attorney when it was filed, just because I had some questions about the case of my own, questions of my own, and he said it could be a year, 2 years before they see the inside of a courtroom. And I'll tell you, another thing that could throw a wrench into all of this is they could just give Consortium News a green light, and then Consortium has no standing.
So let Consortium off the hook, but it wouldn't change anything for anyone else.
Right. And then let's say the Sheer Post would have to sue, and that would take another 2 years. And then you let them off the hook, and then Max Blumenthal would have to sue. Yeah, this is a real uphill struggle.
This coming on the heels of something like the Twitter files, which we discussed last time.
Right. And word is still leaking out about the coming from the Twitter files. We thought we knew all of it 6, 8, 10 months ago.
What new has come out?
That there was an FBI agent who was still working for the FBI who was actually sitting in the Twitter spaces. For what reason?
Like on headquarters? That's terrifying.
What was he doing there? Right.
Where does where like it's so scary to think about this. Like we were saying before, it's like David versus Goliath. How can anyone even I'm not even talking like I told you the story about my friend Jack Murphy who wrote the story for one of the big publications about the NATO people who are pulling off operations in Russia, and then the deputy director kiboshed the story at the end of it right before they published it. So when you have I'm not even obviously the big publications are playing ball. Right, but how can any smaller publication or even an independent journalist like myself or like yourself, how can we have a snowball's chance in hell to publish real journalism in a world like that? And where does it go in 10 years?
Yeah, man. There's no easy answer to that. I'm going to draw an analogy to answer your question. There's a peace group in Washington that's very active called Code Pink, and they disrupt congressional hearings a lot, and they always get on the news. And it's just an absolutely wonderful group of women, a couple of men, mostly women, just wonderful people. And its head, also one of its co-founders, is a woman by the name of Medea Benjamin. Medea can't even be 5 feet tall. And if she weighs more than 90 pounds, I'd be shocked. And she goes nose to nose with some of the biggest, baddest people in the world. The Egyptian police broke her arm and shoulder once, manhandling her. She's been arrested.
What's her name again?
Medea Benjamin.
Can you pull her up, Steve?
Medea has been arrested. Well, I asked her 2 years ago how many times she'd been arrested, and she said she thought she'd been arrested 185 times. She's fearless. There she is. She is absolutely fearless. And whenever I doubt my ability to make change, I think of her. Because is she changing minds by disrupting the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing? Probably not. Maybe she is. But if she disrupts it 10 times or 100 times, I'll tell you another story. When I was the chief investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, we were doing a hearing once, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was testifying. So I was sitting immediately behind John Kerry. He was the chairman of the committee. So if he needed anything, he could just turn his head and tell me, get me a map of, Somalia, which is one of the things he said that day. So, so I'm sitting right behind him, and he turns around and he says, "John, you see these people in pink t-shirts in the front row?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They're going to disrupt the hearing. Ask the cop to throw them out." Well, I had never heard of Code Pink. So I got up, I went through the anteroom, I went all the way around to the back of the hearing room. I went to the cop and I said, "The chairman wants you to throw these women out because they're going to disrupt the hearing." So he comes up and he says, "You have to leave," and he throws them out. It was perfectly peaceful. Mm-hmm. Well, there were like 8 more that we couldn't see had pink t-shirts on under their jackets. So they got up and one of them shouted, "No blood for oil!" And she threw $101 bills at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and they just kind of fluttered down. And he just sat there like a statue, and they were dragged out shouting, "No blood for oil." I was smiling because I thought, wow, that was really ballsy. I'd never, and they're all like in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Not all of them, but many of them. I thought, wow, that was really ballsy. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they throw like it's two rappers going at it in a club, right, where they throw money at each other for disrespect.
Like throwing it at a stripper.
Yeah. So I'm smiling as I'm watching all this, and Kerry turns around and he says, "You think that's funny?" And I said, I caught myself. I said, "I think it's gutsy." And he says, "Keep your opinions to yourself." So when the hearing was over, he got up and walked out, and I'm kind of cleaning up all the papers and stuff. And Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire came up to me, and she says, "John, did you throw those women out?"
"Not in town."
And I said, "I did." She says, "Why?"
"Not in
I said,
town."
"The chairman told me to." And she says, "Well, I'm from New Hampshire.
Hello.
And in New Hampshire, we say live free or die. Learn some respect." Well, now,
At your service.
Code Pink, they're my closest friends.
Wow.
I go to all their marches, all their events, fundraising, whatever. These women do incredible work. And that's where I take my cue from, that we can't stop fighting, right? Yes, it's a David and Goliath thing, like we've both said. And maybe the change is going to be incremental, or maybe there won't be any change at all. But there's certainly going to be no change if you just sit home and say, "Wow, I wish I could change the system, but I can't, so I guess I'll just watch TV." No, you got to be out there fighting. And in my case, fighting means writing or broadcasting or marching or speaking at universities, which I do a lot of. You got to keep up the fight. It's the only way you can make sure that these people are called on the carpet for the crimes that they're committing. And that's what's happening here. They're committing crimes against the American people. I'll give you another example. There's this family out west. So in 2017, there was a standoff in Oregon. It was this family called the Bundy family.
Okay.
And the Bundys were actually from Nevada. And they're constantly fighting the federal government because they graze their cattle on federal lands and they don't pay.
Okay.
Right? You have to pay the government. Because their point is, look, it's federal land, which means it belongs to all the American people. And it wasn't up to the government to seize it in the first place. So we're not paying. And so they're constantly getting arrested and prosecuted. And then one of the sons of Clive Bundy led the takeover of the visitor center at a park in Oregon. And the FBI was sent, and there's a standoff.
Is that them on horseback right there? With
Yeah,
the
that's
flags?
them.
Make that big, Steve.
Holy crap.
Wow. Yeah, that's them. Okay, so the conventional wisdom is like, these Bundys are nuts. They're right-wing extremists. They're freaks. But you know what? Even if that's true, they're right. And they were acquitted in federal court. They were acquitted.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that their pseudonym is BLM.
Yeah, funny, right?
Bureau of Land Management.
And it says, how could a scofflaw like Bundy, who owes more than $1 million in grazing fees, backed by hundreds of armed zealots, manage to run off federal officials who were clearly in the right for seizing Bundy's cows?
God.
Yeah, you see? This is what everybody's up against.
That's crazy, man.
So you just have to fight for what you believe in. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, like, so when you are doing your research and you're like researching news stories that you're going to talk about or things that are happening in the news, where do you get your information?
Oh, yeah, everywhere. Listen, I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning just so I can read like everything. You have to read the mainstream media because you have to know what the government is saying, right? So I read every morning the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal. Then I go to CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Then I do Drudge. On the right, I do Drudge and Gateway Pundit and Daily Caller. And then I go to the left and I read Raw Story, and then I do Independence, Consortium News, Sheer Post, Reader Supported News. Wow, there's so many of them. The Gray Zone.
Just to get a different angles on the stories.
Yeah, and I like to think that I'm smart enough that I know what sounds right and what doesn't sound right. 'Cause some people will say, like, they'll just say something outrageous and be 100% certain in their assertion, and you just know, because you've been doing this for a long time, you know that that's just not right. It's false, or there's a problem with the analysis. So, this is what they taught us to do at the agency, ironically, when I started off as an analyst in January of 1990. You read absolutely everything, because after a while, you become such an expert that you can separate the wheat from the chaff. So at the CIA, I'm going to read cables coming from CIA operations officers overseas, from American embassies and State Department officers working in those embassies, from, they're called DODIRs, Department of Defense intelligence reports from defense attaches around the world, intercepts from NSA, just pulling stuff out of the air. But then I'm also going to read the press. Now, much of the global media is shit. That's just a fact of life, right? Read the Pakistani media, for example, and try to find one true thing in it. Good luck. But you will have read so much from so many different places that you'll know what's true and what's not true. And I find that to be the case with the American media. You can figure it out.
Interesting.
There are a couple of sites that I'd say are really exceptional. The Associated Press and ProPublica.
ProPublica.
Yeah. Most journalism outlets in the United States no longer do investigative journalism. Right. Because it's too expensive.
It takes too long,
It takes too long. You're gonna dedicate a journalist or two to a story that's not going to be published for 3 months. Right. Right? So this journalist is going to write 4 or 5 pieces a year, and you're going to pay them $150,000. So most everybody's phased it out. What ProPublica did then was they set themselves up as a nonprofit solely to carry out investigative reporting. And so, they'll have pieces that are utterly disparate. Like they'll do a piece on solitary confinement. Right. And then they'll do a piece on price fixing in the egg industry. Right. And then they'll do a piece on the falling education scores in the state of Kansas. Stuff that nobody else is going to cover because they don't have the money to do it anymore.
Right. And it's when you're doing it like that, when you're doing these stories that take a long time to cover, it's hard to be relevant to stories that are like happening now.
Exactly. That's right.
I'm curious, when people do work on those types of stories for big publications, right? For like my friend Jack, who I was telling you about, who was writing that story for a year. And they come to a big publication with this story and they say, hey, I have 12 sources. 6 of them are former CIA officers. Other guys are former Army Rangers, whatever that might be. When they go and present their story with obviously they provide who their sources are, but does the editor of that publication by himself go and vet all these sources?
They usually have a fact-checking staff who will call the sources and say, is it true that you said that 75% of X is Y? Is it true that in 1996 you were making $35,000? You know, everything that they're ascribing to you, the fact checker is going to make sure that it's correct.
And do they not only fact check the statements, do they also go and check these people's background and credentials and make sure they are who they say they are?
They're supposed to. Organizations have been burned. You know, when I first started appearing on Fox News, I ran into a guy in the green room. And he was supposed to be this big CIA, you know, deep cover black ops. And he's talking about like black ops and wet work. And I'm like, we don't use those terms. They do in the movies, right? So I said, so what directorate are you in? He said, I'm in ops. I'm in black ops. And I said, what's your division? Oh, I can't say. Okay, bullshit, number one. Secondly, nobody says black ops. And if you call it the company, I'm going to punch you in the face, right? So I said to the producer after I went on, I said, this guy that you had on before me, I think he's faking it. And she's like, what? Why? And I said, he doesn't know the lingo, and he wouldn't tell me what division he was in. And that's like your first brag is what your division was. You know, I was Special Activities Division. I was Counterterrorism Center. I was Near East Operations, whatever. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay, I'll look into it. And they did. And he made the whole thing up. He had never been in the agency. He had never been anywhere. He had never been in the military, nothing. He just made the whole thing up. And he would go on Fox and he would talk with authority. And he ended up going to prison. He's probably still in prison because, you know, once you start peeling that onion, it's not just that he lied to Fox. He lied to the bank to get a mortgage, saying I can't talk about it, but I'm black ops, special wet work, deep cover. Yeah.
You guys don't use the word wet works. No,
nobody does. So dumb. No.
I had Rick Prado in here. He had said the same thing. You know Rick Prado? He was the guy who was down in Iran-Contra. Yeah,
I sure do. I sure do.
In Nicaragua.
His wife doesn't like me.
Oh, really?
I wrote a review of Rick's book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she took exception to.
I think I have it back here. I think I have it on the shelf somewhere. Amy Jacobson wrote a book. I'm sure you're familiar with that one. What she wrote, it's called Surprise, Kill, Vanish.
Right.
All about Billy Waugh.
Billy was a giant. You and I have talked about Billy Waugh.
Have we?
Haven't we?
Maybe we have. I'm sure we have.
Oh, Billy. Billy was a great friend.
He lived like 20 minutes from here.
Yeah, he was in like Niceville, I think it's called.
Yeah. Right. It was really close to Tampa.
Niceville, yeah.
And
I used to make fun of the name of the town.
Oh,
Niceville.
did you? Okay. Yeah, that's funny.
And Billy and I did a lot of stuff together.
Really?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So him and Rick worked together, I think quite
years, a bit. For years. They were joined at the hip.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Billy was one of the most awesome people I ever met at the CIA.
How did you meet him?
He and I did a thing together in I'm going to say the Middle East. It was a couple of months before 9/11. I'll tell you a funny thing. Billy had the filthiest mouth of anybody I've ever encountered in my life. He was just unable to control his swearing. And when you're in the Middle East, you know, these guys are all pious Muslims. They're all cool guys and they want to hang out and maybe they'll have a little, you know, glass of wine once in a while. Probably not. But swearing, absolutely forbidden. So we flew out together to train this Middle Eastern service in counterterrorism operations. We were out there for probably a month and a half or 2 months. And Billy was the lead. He was the lead lecturer. And then I would get up for, specific questions, and I was kind of the logistics guy. And I taught the surveillance and surveillance detection portion. So the colonel that was in charge of this unit finally came up to me and he said, "We're friends." And I said, "Yes, we are. What can I do?" And he said, "You've got to talk to Billy." And I said, "Okay, about what?" And he said, "Please, no more MF, no more GD. I'm going to have a heart attack." And I said, "I honestly don't know if it's possible for him to not say those words. I'll try." So I asked him, and he's like, "No can do. Can't do it." And so he just swore like a sailor for the rest of the time. They loved him. Everybody loved him. But he just couldn't control himself. Funny thing too, he used to drive this gigantic Cadillac. And when we were overseas, he rented a Cadillac. I'm like, how did you even find a Cadillac in this country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's weird.
And he would play this one cassette tape over and over. It was Roger Williams with the piano and the deep, baritone.
Yeah.
Big, like, Liberace kind of. He just loves that stuff. I think I told you the story about Carlos the Jackal and Billy, didn't I?
I know that he was the one who captured him, right?
Yeah. It's one of the most exciting stories I ever heard at the agency. Yeah. Billy had a tendency to embellish his stories. Not this one.
Really?
Yeah, this one was well documented.
How did that one go down?
Billy was in Sudan working for Cofer Black. Cofer Black was the...
CIA.
No, he was us.
Oh, CIA. Okay,
but he was the senior... The term of art we're supposed to use is the senior CIA officer in country. The CIA does not acknowledge any such thing as a station. So whenever we talk about working overseas, that person was the senior CIA officer in country.
Okay.
So Billy's off one day.
Yeah, you said Cofer Black. For some reason, my brain thought Louis Free. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. He's off one day, and he decides to go down to the vegetable market and buy some vegetables for the week. He goes down with a buddy of his, also from the embassy. And, they're the only two white guys in Khartoum, they think. So they're in the vegetable market, and Billy looks, and he's looking at this guy, and he says to his friend, "That's Carlos the Jackal." And the guy's like, "What?" "No, it's not." And Billy said, "Yeah, that's Carlos the Jackal." "No, I don't think so, Billy." Billy said, "I'm sure it is." They go back to the embassy. Kofer's in his office on a, what do you call this? Elliptical machine.
Gazelle?
Elliptical machine.
Yeah.
He's on an elliptical machine. And Billy walks in, he says, "Kofer, I just saw Carlos the Jackal." Kofer says, "Get the fuck out of here." He said, "No, I'm telling you. I was in the vegetable market, and I saw him, and I'm sure it's him." And he's like, "Well, I think you're nuts, but if it's Carlos the Jackal, we're going to have to confirm it."
How old was Billy at this time?
Oh, he was in his 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maniac.
Late 60s, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah. Incredibly great shape. After having been shot more than a dozen times over the course of 3 wars. So, he went back down to that vegetable market every single day for a month. And then they saw Carlos again. So what they decided to do was they hired a couple of Sudanese guys to stage a fist fight. In Muslim countries, it's very, very unusual for you to ever witness physical violence between people. People don't, we have videos on YouTube of Karens. They load 1,000 new ones every day.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, no. People don't do things like that. So they hired these 2 Sudanese guys that were just down there in the market. You give them $10 a piece and just tell them duke it out. So they duke it out, and of course, everybody forms a circle around them because this is so unusual. And Carlos comes to the circle to watch the fight, and he's like craning his neck to try to get a better view. And Billy's got a camera. Click, 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 click. So he goes back to the embassy. They send the pictures to CIA headquarters, and they say, oh my God, it's Carlos the Jackal. Well, Billy had followed him back to his house, so they knew where he lived. And what they ended up doing, I'm not sure how much detail I should get in. They ended up, Carlos had a dental problem. And so what you do is you get the dentist to say, hey, time for a checkup, why don't you come on in? And then you give him gas, and then when he wakes up, he's on a plane on his way to France.
Wow.
Yeah, that was Billy. Hero with capital letters. Hero.
Didn't even have to touch the guy.
No.
Just got to his dentist.
Yeah, that's it.
That's incredible.
Sometimes the best operations are the simplest.
That's so like Billy, I don't remember who told me. I think Rick told me the story. But is it true that Billy was in either Khartoum? I think it was Khartoum, and he was literally following Bin Laden and taking photos of him.
Yeah, that's
for
true
a
too.
long time.
That's true too. The problem there was the Clinton administration wouldn't do anything about it.
Right. He
Because
was
there
like
were-
he
there
wanted
were
to
no-
take him out, but they wouldn't let him.
There were no criminal charges pending against him. Yeah, and that's because DOJ dropped the ball. The CIA had been telling the Justice Department and the White House since 1991, this is a very bad guy. He means us harm. We need to do something about it. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, we have to wait until he actually commits a crime against an American. And then we'll go to court and we'll file charges. And then 10 years later, we have 9/11. It's like, what have you people been doing for the last 10 years? Now, today, the CIA would send a team and they would take him out.
They would today.
Today, yes. Because post 9/11, there was a revision of Executive Order 12333.
You're saying post 9/11 they would do
Post
that.
9/11.
Okay, got it.
But in the 90s, 12333 said, oh, no, you don't. Yeah, times have changed.
I love Trump's speech. It was probably my favorite speech he's ever done, where he walks out in front. Al-Baghdadi, he died like a loser. The dogs came in and tore him apart. It was a terrible death. Oh my God!
I forgot about
he
that.
sat out there and freestyled for like 30 minutes about how much
That's
of a
Trump.
loser he was and how bad he died, and he was just like, oh God, that was a sight. That was amazing to watch. So was that the reason that they got him? Was that like the same thing you were talking about, the same law that they would have used to take out Bin Laden?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, once 9/11 occurred, it was 2, 3, 4 days after 9/11, President Bush signed an executive order that altered Executive Order 12333, which had been signed back in the 70s, that said, among other things, it's a very long, extensive executive order, that the CIA just can't assassinate people. And now they can.
Wow. How much of that is going on right now? Like, you think, like, when I think of the CIA, like some people I have in here, they just say, oh, well, it's it's all boring. It's all,
A lot of it is.
A lot of it's just
hurry up and wait.
Analytics, yeah, and analysis, following people, taking down intel, and then it goes through the funnel.
Yeah.
But like, how much of it in today's world is actually like capture, kill, or like?
I would say very, very little.
Really?
Very little. This is an unusual, rare occurrence. Now, they were doing it a lot in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 because we had so many people that needed to be taken off the street, whether you're going to capture them, render them to a third country, or kill them. Think the entire Al-Qaeda leadership, for example. And then ISIS came out of that because Al-Qaeda wasn't violent enough. ISIS was created, and then you have the Somalis, and then you have the Libyans, and then you've got Hambali down in Indonesia or Malaysia or wherever it was that he was. So there were a lot of moving parts back then, and now not so much anymore. Also, think of it this way. It was a very big deal 20 years ago to use a drone, right? If we send a drone up to do something, we're all gathered around a screen at CIA headquarters to ooh and ah over what the drone is doing. Now we have 1,000 drones a day out there. We don't even pay any attention to what the drones are doing.
That's the so all the drones and this. I just did a podcast about this, so I know I have some decent knowledge about the surveillance that goes on around the world. But we have these surveillance drones as well as these satellites that are literally everywhere, and that's
Everywhere.
signals intelligence. So we can
Yes.
tap into anywhere we want, anywhere in now or in the past, right?
Right. And let me give you another example of how times have changed. When Iraq invaded Kuwait on August the 2nd, 1990, we made a decision. The White House made a decision that day. We're going to liberate Kuwait. Okay? There was no hemming and hawing. We're going to go to the UN and we're going to see what we can do. We're going to have negotiations. President George H.W. Bush said on August the 2nd, we're going to liberate Kuwait. So what took us so long? Why did we wait until February of 1991? Because that's how long it took to move the satellite that was over the Soviet Union to put it over Iraq.
What?
Can you imagine? And we're all like patiently waiting. Where's the satellite today? Oh, it's over Turkmenistan. It's on its way.
Why did it take so long for a satellite to get there?
Because that's how long it took in 1990.
Jesus.
Yeah.
They move like 17,000 miles an hour now. It's crazy.
Yeah. And in the meantime,
And
you could
they're
just,
everywhere.
They're everywhere. The whole globe is covered. And now they're not even classified. Now you can buy, Google Earth images.
Right.
Yeah. Back then it was so highly classified, we couldn't even acknowledge that there were such things as satellites.
We were watching a video a couple weeks ago on here of a company called, I want to say it was, I forget what it was called, but it was a company that was basically a sub company of Lockheed Martin, and they were it was like a product promo of their satellite system that they have, where they showed all these satellites that are surrounding every fucking section of the earth 24/7, and it was frightening. I was like, if you want to give anyone induce schizophrenia in anybody, just get them stoned and show them that video, and it's like you're being watched 24 hours a day by a eye in the sky. It was frightening.
20 years ago or so, there was a Will Smith movie. I don't remember what it was, like Enemy of the State maybe, or something like that, where he's running through Georgetown in Washington, and he's chasing some guy, and he's on the radio with NSA, and he's like, I need live video feed stat. And I was at the movie with a bunch of CIA people, and we all busted out laughing. Like, what do you mean live video feed? What planet do you live on? And now,
Now it's real.
now it's real.
And this is only what, 15 years later?
That's it.
That's wild, man. So I want to talk a little bit about the Russia-Ukraine NATO thing, conflict that's going on right now. But first, I got to pee real quick.
Sure.
And we'll jump right back in.
Sounds good.
I got a tiny bladder. I'm sorry.
Not a problem.
This holiday season, you might be looking for some delicious, nutritional meals to fuel you on those jam-packed days. Factor, head to Factor. Yeah, we off. That's code DJP50 at factormeals.com/DJP50 for 50% off. It's linked below. Now back to the show. Yeah, we were just off camera after the pee break telling the story about how when you captured Abu Zubaydah and he woke up from his coma and saw the SpongeBob shirt, he knew the Americans had him.
He knew the Americans had him all right.
That was an incredible story. And then, so I remember you took him to the tarmac. They had to put him on a plane, and you didn't have a need to know. You wanted to know where he was going, but they couldn't tell you. And you found out later he was in Guantanamo.
No, I found out years later he was in Guantanamo. He ended up going to a series of secret prisons around the world. Somebody, I don't know who, there's an officer who's been accused of it, but she was never prosecuted. But somebody leaked the existence of these secret prisons back in, I'm going to say it was like 2006 or 2007. The media have reported accurately on the locations of these prisons.
Are these also black sites?
Yes,
Called black sites?
also
Okay.
called black
Okay.
sites. The CIA has never acknowledged their locations. So I can't say, oh, the prison was here. The black site was there. I can't say it. But all you have to do is Google CIA black sites. It lists them. There have been multiple lawsuits coming out of this program. And in many cases, and this was always fascinating to me, these secret prisons or black sites tended to be handshake agreements between the director of the CIA and the director of whatever foreign intelligence service. In many of these cases, even the prime minister or president of the country didn't know that there was a CIA black site in this country. Isn't that amazing?
That's wild.
Talk about the potential for blowback.
Right.
Just, if I were the prime minister or president of a country and I found this out, I would call the president of the United States and say, who do you think you are? You don't even have the courtesy to tell me that you want to use my country for one of your torture chambers? And in several cases, this led to the collapse of these governments.
Really?
What kind of president are you that you don't even know there's a CIA black site in your country?
Right.
The Americans played you like a fool. Yeah. So it was very controversial at the time.
When you captured Abu Zubaydah and he got shot 3 times in the stomach, the leg, and the groin, that whole story about the hospital going under a barrage of gunfire and calling in a helicopter to get you guys out of there, like, how many years has it been since you captured him?
Almost 22.
22, and he was, do you remember how old he was?
Yeah, to the best of my recollection, he was like 25 or 27, something like that. He was very young. I remember being struck by his youth. I was young at the time. I was 30, let me think, what was I? I was 37.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking, wow, this is Al-Qaeda. This is what we're so afraid of. He's just a young guy. One of the most wanted men in the world.
And that was probably one of the most defining moments of your career in the CIA.
Oh,
right?
it was. It was the defining event of my life, really.
What would you say to him if you got to meet him again? And do you think there's a possibility? Would you ever want to go have a meeting with him in Guantanamo and talk to him?
I'd like to. I've spoken to his attorney many times. This is the reason why I'm still talking about this 22 years later. We believed at the time that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, right? He was identified by the White House as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was identified in Time magazine, which was a major publication at the time, as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. We knew that he had founded Al-Qaeda's safe house in Peshawar, Pakistan, called the House of Martyrs. And that's where people would stay as they were preparing to go to Afghanistan for training, terrorist training. Not only did he establish the House of Martyrs, he also established Al-Qaeda's 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan, in Helmand province and in Kandahar. So we knew this was a bad guy. If you were already in the fight and you wanted to go home, Abu Zubaydah would forge a passport and get you tickets home. If you wanted to join the fight, he would get you to the House of Martyrs and then into Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan, he would get you to wherever it was you were supposed to go. So this was a bad guy, but he was not the number 3 in Al-Qaeda.
No.
He had never joined Al-Qaeda. He talked about it, but he had never sworn an oath to Osama bin Laden. So he was viewed by bin Laden and by the Al-Qaeda leadership as an independent, sort of a friendly independent.
Like a guy like that bin Laden would give him a wink and a nod of approval.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the bigger problem for us at the CIA, and we didn't know this until 2005, was that Abu Zubaydah had a first cousin who was also named Abu Zubaydah. And so that Abu Zubaydah was in Montana. And then when 9/11 hit, he said, oh shit, I got to get out of here. And he ran to Jordan. So our sister agencies are picking up intelligence here, there, and everywhere, out of the air, out of the sky, Abu Zubaydah is in Amman, he's doing this. Abu Zubaydah's in Pakistan, he's doing that. Abu Zubaydah's in Afghanistan. Abu Zubaydah's in Syria. It's like, oh my God, this is a terrorist Superman, right? But it was two of them. Two of them. We didn't know. And so we thought, well, if he's able to move from country to country and he's plotting all these different operations, we got to stop this guy. We know that bin Laden's number one. We know that Ayman al-Zawahiri is number two. Mohammed Atef was number three. We killed him in October of 01. So that means Abu Zubaydah must be the number three, right? Because he's out doing all this different stuff.
Right.
And it turned out he wasn't, actually. So, you know, this is what makes this a sad story, and this is why I would be willing to talk to Abu Zubaydah, and this is why I am willing to talk to his attorney, because, first of all, he was not the terrorist Superman we thought he was. He was a bad guy, so if he was a bad guy, he should have been charged with a crime and put on trial, as the Constitution says that he should, and he should face his accusers in a court of law. Well, we know from the Senate torture report that the CIA will never permit him to be charged in a court of law. And in fact, the torture report tells us that the CIA has made a policy decision that Abu Zubaydah will never leave Guantanamo, ever. And when he does die, eventually, he'll be cremated and his ashes thrown into the Caribbean. So remember, this is a guy who has never been charged with a crime. So why hold him? Right?
What is their reasoning, or what is their explanation for that?
They fucked it up, and they can't let any more get out into the public. Kiriakou was bad enough, blabbing that, you know, we tortured him. But then the Senate torture report actually lays it all out, blow by blow by blow, what they did to him. And then if we release him, what, he's going to be on every TV channel in the world talking about the torture that he underwent at the hands of the Americans. The CIA can't allow that.
What would you say to him?
I would say that I'm sorry for the way he's been treated. Nobody deserves to be treated this way. If he was the killer that we said he was, he should have been tried and convicted and punished accordingly. If he was not the killer that we said he was, he should be released.
What is going on with the other guy at Guantanamo who was in charge with orchestrating everything?
That's a different case. That is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yes, that's
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the earthly incarnation of Satan. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is a perplexing character because, you know, he was an exchange student here. He went to some state university in North Carolina, lived with an American family. He's utterly Americanized. But he self-radicalized when he went back to the Middle East or to Pakistan. He devoted many, many years to hatching plans or plots to kill as many Americans as he possibly could. Well before 9/11, there's something you and I have discussed in the past called the Bojinka plot. So the Bojinka plot was an idea that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed came up with in the Philippines to hijack, it was something like 10 747s, and to fly them all into buildings up and down the west coast of the United States. He actually had a chance of that plot working, and he had all these papers laid out, maps, drawings, notes, and he left his apartment, and housekeeping went in to the apartment to clean the apartment. And the housekeeper is looking at this like, what the heck is all this stuff? I better call the police. She calls the police. They said, this looks like the plans for a terrorist attack. And so they set out to look for him. They didn't know his name. They only knew him by the name Mukhtar, which I think you and I have talked about in the past. But he escaped. He escaped from Manila. So we knew that there was this very bad dude out there known as Mukhtar, who was plotting this massive terrorist attack that would take place on the West Coast. So we knew that Mukhtar was involved in the planning for 9/11. As it turned out, 9/11 was completely his idea. But we didn't know who he was. We didn't know what his real name was. And that was one of the two most important things that Abu Zubaydah gave us in his FBI interviews.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He actually laughed at the FBI agent, Ali Soufan, when Ali said, we didn't know who Mukhtar was. He's like, how can you not know who Mukhtar was? He's the most dangerous man in the world. And he said, we don't know. Oh, it's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Was he the guy who was in the apartment that apparently there was some Saudi intelligence that were tracking him or knew about him that they didn't tell us about?
Yes, that was one of the side stories to this. There's a book by, to the best of my recollection, it was a couple of journalists from the Los Angeles Times, and they said that the CIA had a human source that led them to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I was already working on Iraq at the time, so I wasn't involved in this thing. But it was a human source. It was not an intercept, and it was not a foreign service that led us to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
And the human source was Saudi?
I don't have any idea. Well, the Saudis, listen, you can't trust the Saudis as far as you could pick one of them up and throw them. Mm-hmm. And this is a beef that I've had with the Saudi government and the Saudi royal family really all of my adult life. We profess to have this special relationship with the Saudis, and they profess a special relationship with us. It's just not true. We don't like each other. We don't trust each other, but we buy their oil and they buy our weapons. It's as simple as that. It's transactional. When we captured Abu Zubaydah, we also captured his diary, or what's known as his diary.
Right.
It's not really a diary, but you and I have talked about that as well. Mm-hmm. Well, in this diary, he also had the names and cell phone numbers of two members of the Saudi royal family. And then when we approached the Saudis and we asked them, what's this all about? Next thing you know, one of them goes into the desert to go camping and he dies of thirst. Can you imagine? He dies of thirst. The other one was killed in a spectacular one-car accident in the desert.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's like, it's so crazy. It's like at the level of these nations, right? Like you have all these different levels of society, and at the very, very top, you have the nation states, and above that, there's nothing. Mm-hmm. It's like lawless. It's the wild, wild west. When you're looking at America, Saudi Arabia, Iran, it's Russia, China, it's like, it's anarchy.
Yeah, it is. It's anarchy. That's why I lament the death of modern diplomacy, you know? Because I think that as a matter of national policy, we should always just let the diplomats do their job. Not send carrier battle groups, here and there and everywhere, and with threats of, why I oughta, that kind of thing. You better not cross this line or you're going to get it.
Right.
We should let the diplomats do their jobs. And this whole thing about, getting back to Ukraine for a moment.
Yes, I wanted to go into that.
This whole thing about, that evil Putin, he's crazy. He just invaded out of the clear blue sky. Like, are you joking? Like, does nobody know the history of U.S. involvement in Ukraine?
Right.
The Maidan uprising and
Orange Revolution.
The Orange Revolution and Hillary Clinton involved in changing governments, and like, does nobody pay attention to these things? So this is
Have you ever met Putin?
No, but I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was invited to a dinner in Moscow to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the founding of RT, Russia Today, the big television network. And they sent me, it was actually it's the first time in my life I ever received an engraved invitation, right? Like it's the 50s. and all expenses paid. They're going to fly me to Moscow, and they're going to put me in this hotel, and I'm going to be at this VIP table of Americans. And so I had just gotten out of prison. So I went to the judge and I said, hey, I'm invited to this really important dinner in Moscow. And she says, absolutely not. So I wasn't allowed to go.
Well, my first question once I get out of prison for whistleblowing against the CIA
to go to Moscow. So this was the dinner where General Flynn went, Mike Flynn, and Jesse Ventura, and Jill Stein, and Mike Maloof, and all these like important outsiders all sitting at the same table. And then Putin walks in and sits down and shakes hands, and they all get a big picture together, and then Putin leaves. So at first I was like, damn it! It's like the only chance in my life I would ever have to meet Vladimir Putin. And then afterwards, you know, they arrest Mike Flynn, they open a grand jury on some of these other guys, they call Jill Stein a traitor. I'm so glad I didn't go to that dinner. Oh my God. I have enough problems in my life.
Do you think Putin wanted to or currently wants to conquer Ukraine and Eastern Europe?
Oh, no. I've never thought that. You know, looking back, too, going back to the Clinton administration, when Putin first became president, at the very tail end of Bill Clinton's presidency, he floated the idea of Russia joining NATO.
Not in town.
And Clinton said, yeah, I don't think we really like that.
Of Russia?
Yeah, Russia joining NATO. Because the Soviet Union's gone. We're all friends now, right?
Right.
The peace dividend. We're always talking about. How are we going to spend the peace dividend?
Right.
We don't need to spend money on defense anymore.
Right.
Hardy har har. So Clinton's like, we don't really like that idea very much. And he said, okay, if you won't let Russia in NATO, at least don't allow any of the countries on our border to join NATO. And Clinton said, that we can agree to. Next thing you know, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland all join NATO. Directly on the Russian border. And he's like, hey, you promised us that you wouldn't let any of these countries join NATO. Sorry. We changed our minds.
Right.
You know, strategic planning and all. Then when Obama becomes president, at a summit with Putin, Putin said, I spoke with Clinton years ago about Russia joining NATO. It's something that we would like to explore.
Who said this again?
Putin. To Obama. And Obama said, no, we don't like that idea. We don't think that's going to happen. And he said, okay, well, you guys lied to me about these other countries joining NATO. So don't allow Ukraine to join NATO. This is going to be a serious problem otherwise. And he's like, okay, we won't.
I need mana.
And then Joe Biden becomes president, and he's like, oh, you know, Ukraine would be a great addition to NATO and the European Union. And the Russians said, we've had enough. There was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine that was overthrown at the urge of the United States in 2014. As if that wasn't bad enough, as soon as that happens, then they want to talk about Ukraine joining NATO. So the Russians said, we've had enough. That's the background to Ukraine. I don't think that the Russians have any... I don't think that they're expansionist as a matter of policy. They have a history of expansionism, certainly, just like we do. The Chinese do not. But we do, and the Russians do.
But we don't expand that way, right? We expand in a weird way of just gaining influence over the country. We don't make them party. Like, it's not a, we don't, like, America's not a traditional empire like you look at the British Empire, right? Like,
correct.
We just have these other countries that depend on us, and we basically control that. We have all the influence in those countries.
Yeah, but then the Libyans would say that's wrong, and the Afghans would say that's wrong, and you know, the Chinese would say that's wrong because of what we're doing with Taiwan now.
It's wrong, and what? It's wrong that we do it, or it's not true.
Well, it's not true. Look at Libya just as the easiest example. Steve Kappas, who was the deputy director of the CIA, made a secret at the time, not secret anymore, trip to Libya in the immediate aftermath of the start of the Iraq War. And he said, look, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He's going to die. We know that you have weapons of mass destruction. So you can either give them all to us and we all live happily ever after, or you can die. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And so for only the second time in the history of the planet, with South Africa being the first, Libya voluntarily gave up its weapons of mass destruction program. And then we overthrew him anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, Hillary Clinton famously said, we came, we saw, he died. What's that? Is our word worth nothing?
Right. What sort of weapons did they have? They had a nuclear program?
They did not have a nuclear program, but they had quite a robust chemical weapons program.
Okay.